Yesterday's St Patrick's Day was observed in the city of Dublin with the customary manifestations of devotion to the memory of Ireland's patron saint.
Well, it'll come as no surprise that that newspaper report didn't appear this year or last. In fact, it's from the 18th of March 1882 and it continued.
Though business was in no wise suspended, the streets showed unusual crowds all day, and needless to add, the national emblem, the shamrock, was prominently worn by young and old, male and female. Even the police constables, on and off duty, braved the peril of reasonable suspicion by sporting a morsel of green leaf in their unspiked helmets. The day being a holiday of obligation, the masses celebrated in Catholic churches were thronged from early morning till noon.
And that was about the height of it on St Patrick's Day 140 years ago, according to the Freeman's Journal. So when did the celebrations start moving out of the churches and onto the streets? And how did the idea for the parade evolve, for example? And how far back did the day turn into a massive drink fest? I'm joined by Dr. Marnie Hay, Research Fellow with the Department of History at Trinity College in Dublin, who's been looking into this matter for us. You're very, very welcome indeed, Marnie.
Thank you.
The actual celebration of St Patrick's Day, apparently, and I must say this really surprised me, can be traced back to the 17th century.
Yeah, and it's by then that it's underway. You get some local celebrations and stuff before that. But the reason why the 17th century is significant for us is because in 1631, the Pope made the Feast of St. Patrick, added it to the church calendar. So suddenly it's on the radar there. So it ends up becoming not just a church thing in Ireland, it's also by the 17th century. So that's the 1600s. It's a civic occasion as well, and it's celebrated in much the same way other local saints' days were celebrated, what they called the paterns, and that was kind of a corruption of the word patron saint. And what went on in those, and this was very common throughout Ireland, was you'd have the church observance, the formal stuff in the morning, and then you'd have kind of a party in the afternoon. So often tents would be put up and there would be drinking and dancing and partying and festivities. And it was all about marking, your local patron saint. But of course, by then, you had Patrick evolving as this, as the major saint for Ireland.
Sounds like it was a lot more fun in the 1630s and 1640s and in the 17th century than it was in 1882, at least according to the Freeman's Journal. So basically you've also answered another one of my two questions you've answered there. It started to become a drink fest back in the 17th century, and the other one, which you anticipated, because I was going to ask you, whose brilliant idea was it to have our national feast day, our national holiday, on the 17th of March in the middle of the extended Irish winter? And it was the Pope, basically.
Well, I suppose we could say it was the Pope. There had been a tradition of celebrating the death, or maybe celebrating's not the word, marking the death of St. Patrick on the 17th of March. So that's where the date came from.
So somebody decided that's when he died.
Yeah.
Not that there was anybody around to contradict them or to prove it or disprove it or any of that. No, we've had a long tradition, obviously, here of parading to mark this key date on the political, social, religious calendar. But the St. Patrick's Day parade, starting in the 18th century, didn't actually start in this country.
No, it's a diaspora thing, and it starts in the second half of the 18th century in the United States. Or, well, it was not the United States yet. It was the 13 colonies. So originally what you have is parades, particularly Boston and New York are key ones, where you have Irishmen who are in the British Army stationed there, having a military procession and then going on, and they'd probably go along to a church service. And so it's initially those parades are military parades, and that in many ways echoes later on what happens in Ireland after independence.
And these parades were not necessarily Catholic parades either. They were Protestant parades to a large extent.
Well, this is it, because a lot of those men who were in the British Army, Irishmen who were stationed there, were Protestants. You also have, because in those early years of emigration I keep saying the United States, but it's the 13 colonies at that time, is that a lot of them were Protestant who went over and settled. And
the Scotch-Irish.
Yes, yeah, what we would call Ulster Scots now. And they had gone over, a lot of them had done very well, and they got into celebrating. Often what they did was they set up charitable Irish societies. Often you run across the name Benevolent Irish Society, excuse me, Charitable Irish Society. They set them up, and what they do for St. Patrick's Day is they have a banquet, a fundraising banquet, and they have a great old time, and then they raise money to help out Irishmen who aren't doing so well. So there's that sort of the wining and dining side of things, and you also have those military parades. The other thing you get in other American cities is the military parade, getting all the Irish fellas involved to try to attract other Irishmen to join the army. So there's a
recruitment element.
Yes, a recruitment element with the music and the marching and the pageantry.
And after the American Revolution, though, when it was the United States of America, the St. Patrick's Day celebration waned a bit, didn't it?
It did. So you get that period there, and what happens is that these Irish Americans focus their energy on getting involved with the 4th of July celebrations. And I mean, part of that is, they're really trying to build up a tradition there. This is a new country. They're trying to build it up. These guys are trying to show their place in this country. But once you get, it starts to build up again. You go back to those St. Patrick's Day celebrations, particularly once you get into the 19th century. And increasingly, you have that influx of Irish people coming in. And this time, it's a massive influx of Catholics. And particularly, one of the key dates for us, from 1827 onwards, the British restrictions on the numbers who are allowed to emigrate, this loosens up. So you get, even before the famine, you're getting more Irish people going over. They're looking for opportunities, and they're flooding into there. And what they're looking to do is to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And in many ways, this challenges that, before that, the Protestant Irish in America are kind of running the show. But when you have the massive influx of the Catholics, that suddenly changes the dynamic.
And it becomes a social celebration at that point again?
They move out of the banquet halls, the very exclusive dinners to raise money. Instead, you've got big numbers of people, not necessarily the social elite. Well, you're not going to get a banquet hall big enough for these people. They want to celebrate outdoors in a much more public manner.
And are they parading as well as celebrating? Is that part of the celebration? A parade, a St. Patrick's Day parade in New York, in Boston, in Philadelphia, in these East Coast Irish American cities?
That's what ends up happening. And this is something that particularly these Catholics who come in, they want to show it off and bring it out. Bring the party out into the street, have a parade. And this is where we start to get the marching bands, the music, the colour, the banners, the pageantry. It's not just that military parade, which has its own pageantry in itself, but the big shebang is what we're getting. And initially, sometimes it's a parade here, a parade there. By the time you're hitting about the mid-19th century, you're looking at the 1840s. By then, that concept of the annual parade, that's pretty much embedded. And it's not just in the United States. You're getting that tradition in Canada, and you're getting it in other places like Australia.
You've come across a couple of unusual celebrations. One in particular, I think it's in Canada. Tell us about it.
I ran across this one, and I suppose because I'm from Canada, it really made me smile. In the early 19th century, in the Ottawa Valley, this was an area where you had a lot of lumberjacks. Timber was the big industry that was going on. A lot of Irish guys working in that area. So, of course, they want to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Well, what do? They go to the shops in the town and they go to the ladies' shops and they buy all
Lumberjacks go to ladies' shops?
Yeah, for one day of the year.
Okay.
One day of the year. Okay. Here, give them a chance. Give the fellas a chance. And they go and they buy bright green parasols. Right? And let's face it, they've got a few drinks on them at this point.
Clearly.
And they go around town with their parasols, mincing around, their bright green parasols, no less, mincing around, imitating the fashionable ladies of the town.
So this is a kind of a Monty Python lumberjack song type St. Patrick's Day celebration in Ottawa. A couple of texts in. Tom in County Meath says we could do with a benevolent society now to help us out. Amen to that one, Tom. And Mairead says, when did people start wearing the shamrock on the 17th of March? Well, clearly, on the basis of what we heard from the Freeman's Journal of 1882, they were wearing the shamrock then. I don't know when.
Apparently, when I was looking into this, that's a 16th century thing. That started.
16th?
Yes,
wow.
in the 1500s. That's when people started wearing the shamrock.
Okay, so moving on then to Ireland. I mean, you were talking about the 1840s, that these parades, this celebratory mood had come to Ireland by the 1840s. Also in the 1830s and 1840s, you had a very strong temperance movement in this country. How did that impact on St. Patrick's Day celebrations in Ireland?
Well, the temperance movement tried to take it over because they see it as a key. St. Patrick's by then, it is associated with drink. It's associated with, if you're at the more elite level, you're going out to the balls and the dinners, there's all that kind of stuff going on at, say, Dublin Castle. But also at a sort of the masses level, people are drinking, there's revelry, it's associated with booze. In that period, the temperance movement are very keen to, you're getting into a time where Irish people are trying to show, that we're worthy of, when we're looking 1840s, the repeal movement, worthy of self-government. And there's a real backlash, a sense that alcoholism, they don't see it as an illness. They see it as a personal choice, a choice to be poor. And people were sick of, as taxpayers, they didn't want to support this. So you've got a lot of this anti-drinking attitude, this focus on respectability. St. Patrick's is associated with booze. And it's seen as, if you want to have a kind of a promotional hook to hang something on, St. Patrick's is perfect. So what you have with the temperance movement is they start holding parades on St. Patrick's Day.
Temperance parades?
Yes, temperance parades. But they're trying to make not drinking or drinking in moderation sexy. Make it look like fun. I know.
Were there rival parades? I mean, were there temperance parades and intemperance parades, no?
Not that I ran across. It seems to be that those who were out drinking were just busy drinking. And then you'd have these parades. And they were bringing in the marching bands and the colour. And, people would have Celtic crosses in their hats with green ribbons sort of festooned in them. And, of course, wearing the shamrock. So they were trying to make it colourful, make it fun, carnivalesque, but without the drink.
Question from a listener. What did people drink in the 1800s and where did they do their drinking?
Well, apparently a lot of it was punch, whiskey, whatever they could have. But you get a real big business for inns and hotels around with the 18th century, into the 19th century as well, is that because a lot of organisations would set up, they'd have a party for St. Patrick's and they would rent a room in a hotel or an inn, or people are going in. So they're doing a lot of drinking there in those kind of establishments. So there's money to be made. And that's something we need to remember all along with St. Patrick's. There's always somebody looking to make money and they're doing it.
What about the famine? Did that have an impact on the celebration of St. Patrick's Day?
It definitely had an impact. And this is one of our difficulties in trying to reconstruct that period from about 1845 and then the decade afterwards, up to about 1860. It's harder to get reports of what was going on St. Patrick's Day because most of the material that's coming down to us is more focused on the impact of the famine, just trying to survive. But there are little glimmers here and there. We can find out a bit. Apparently Dublin Castle were still having their dinners and balls, maybe not on such a flamboyant basis, but they were still doing it. Parts of the country that were less affected by the famine, there would be smaller, muted celebrations. It seemed to depend where you were and how hard your area was hit by the famine. But it's more muted. And certainly in the diaspora communities, they're using St. Patrick's as a fundraising vehicle to send money back to the homeland.
And when did it become an official public holiday?
1903, and it was the Irish Parliamentary Party and the Gaelic League were the ones who were doing the lobbying to get that.
And I mean, why was it important to them that we should have a public holiday, and why was it important to them that St. Patrick's Day should become an official public holiday?
I think it was they were looking. I mean, we're in a nationalist movement, both cultural and political at that time. There was a sense that this should be a national holiday, and for many people, they did actually get the day off prior to that, depending on what business they were working in. A lot of people were taking the afternoon off, and it was leisure time. But it was felt that there was a real need for a focus for a national day, and that's what they hung their hat on.
And obviously independence in 1922, and something that absolutely shocked me, I have to say, because apparently the Irish government decided to prohibit the sale of alcohol on the 17th of March.
Yeah, that was one of the early things they did in the 1920s, and that prohibition continued until 1961, if you can believe it. But I think it shows us the connection that there was between the Irish government and the Catholic Church. And I think, too, that temperance, that sense of temperance, we get that tradition going along because you do, within the nationalist movement, prior to independence, there is a focus on temperance at times, or not drinking too much, trying to show respectability, worthiness of self-government. So there is that tradition going through. You know, that's not, even amongst certain Republicans, you get that tradition coming through. And we see it when you have the new government being set up.
How's about then the modern St. Patrick's Day, the St. Patrick's Day we associate with the last, 10, 20 years of massive parades in Dublin, in Cork, in Galway, in the cities and towns, and I mean in almost every sizable town in Ireland? To do, which is to do with floats, which is to do with local businesses and industry and all of that.
That comes in the early 50s. I should maybe back up a little bit. After independence, the official government celebration is, in addition to the public holiday, the church observance in the morning, there was a formal military procession in Dublin from Collins Barracks, goes across Grattan Bridge, down Dame Street, down College Green, where you get big crowds there, then going to O'Connell Street, and then on to the Pro Cathedral, where there'd be a mass. And again, that connection between the state and the Catholic Church. So that was up until the early 50s, a trooping the colours kind of ceremony. And what we get the change in the early 50s is it's the, I'm just trying to think, it's got a very long name, the place that it's to do with, I'm trying to think of the name, I'm sorry about this. It's an organisation that's interested in, it's the Agricultural...
The National Agricultural and Industrial Development Association.
Better you than me. I knew I'd forget that one because it's got a big long name.
Blame you.
This organisation wanted to promote the economy. I mean, 1950s, Irish economies in the doldrums, loads of emigration. So what they're looking to do is to try to raise awareness about Irish products, agricultural products, industrial products, and they figure, they've seen the success of the parades in America, and they get this idea. What we'll do is we'll have a parade. It'll, this will be a big public spectacle. It will encourage people to buy Irish. So you have different companies getting involved, and they have to be Irish-owned companies, and they sponsor floats. So you start to have the floats, and like companies like Guinness's and CIE and all these, they would sponsor floats. The employees would be on the floats waving to everybody. And, you've got the marching bands, the music, the pageantry. So that's early 1950s. And that tradition, and in the 1950s, you've got a crowd of about 100,000 turning up to watch this in Dublin. And there's the little parades around the country as well. The record number of businesses participated in 1965. You had 65 businesses. But by then, the concept's a bit tired. There's a sense that maybe something else is needed. 1969, there's a switch to a general parade, not the focus on the industrial, agricultural side of things. And then in 1970, Dublin tourism take it over.
And is that when the drum majorettes and the American marching bands and all of those arrive?
Yeah, they start inviting all these people over from the United States. And it's as if an American parade has been transplanted in Dublin. But again, that works for a while. People are taken with it. But we're talking about the St. Patrick's Day parade. It's an invented tradition that has to keep reinventing itself.
Yeah, which it has done quite successfully in the last few years with the St. Patrick's Festival. Rather than focusing on the one day, it now takes place over a period of 4 or 5 days. Marnie, fascinating stuff. Thank you very, very much indeed. Just before you go, a couple more texts. People drink on St. Patrick's Day because it's the only day in Lent that you're allowed to drink. Is there any other country, somebody asked, that shuts up shop for its annual religious feast day? Quite a few of them, I think. Mexico, for example. Mick says, I'm in my early 20s. I hope that any old codgers who are cranking up making their annual rant about the carry-on and drinking of young people on St. Patrick's Day are listening to this programme. It's only history repeating itself. That's all it is. And Frank M says, Guinness was invented in 1759. As far as I know, whiskey was around well before this, so I suppose our ancestors on St. Patrick's Day drank pretty much the same as folk do today. Marnie, hey, thank you very, very much indeed. After the break, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, our March Book Club choice.
Phone, the history